Why did Solomon ask for wisdom? This is the question we seek to answer today as we begin our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Chronicles on walking through the Bible.
Of his word, the glory of his cross.
Today we're going to be discussing 2 Chronicles chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Chronicles chapter 1, beginning at verse 1. Now Solomon the son of David was strengthened in his kingdom, and the Lord his God was with him and exalted him exceedingly. And Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the captains of thousands and of hundreds, to the judges and to every leader in all Israel, the heads of the fathers' houses. Then Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for the tabernacle of meeting with God was there, which Moses the servant of the Lord had made in the wilderness. But David had brought up the ark of God from Kirjath-jearim to the place David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it at Jerusalem. Now the bronze altar that Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, had made, he put before the tabernacle of the Lord. Solomon and the assembly sought him there. And Solomon went up there to the bronze altar before the Lord, which was at the tabernacle of meeting, and offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. On that night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, "Ask, what shall I give you?" And Solomon said to God, "You have shown great mercy to David my father, and have made me king in his place. Now, O Lord God, let your promise to David my father be established, for you have made me king over a people like the dust of the earth in multitude. Now give me wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people. For who can judge this great people of yours?" Then God said to Solomon, "Because this was in your heart, and you have not asked for riches or wealth or honor or the life of your enemies, nor have you asked for long life, but have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may judge my people over whom I have made you king. Wisdom and knowledge are granted to you, and I will give you riches and wealth and honor, such as none of the kings have had who were before you, nor shall any after you have the like." So Solomon came to Jerusalem from the high place that was at Gibeon, from before the tabernacle of meeting, and reigned over Israel. And Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he stationed in the chariot cities, and with the king in Jerusalem. Also the king made silver and gold as common in Jerusalem as stones, and he made cedars as abundant as sycamores, which are in the lowland. And Solomon had horses imported from Egypt and Keva. The king's merchants bought them in Keva at the current price. They also acquired and imported from Egypt a chariot for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. Thus, through their agents, they exported them all to the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Syria. The book of 1 Chronicles ended with the ascension of Solomon as king of Israel and the death of David, the man after God's own heart. The chronicler skips over the attempted coup by Adonijah, or even the punishment that follows for it, due to the fact that this book is written from a priestly point of view, and such an inclusion, while interesting, would detract from that narrative. Thus, the focus of chapter 1 is on the worship of Solomon, and how Solomon's heart towards God would lead to a strengthening of his kingdom. The chapter really begins by showing us why Solomon went to Gibeon. Back in 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 3 and 4, the writer of 2 Kings said this about Solomon. "And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high place. Now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar." If we simply read through this passage quickly, and without the knowledge of what 1 and 2 Chronicles reveal to us that 2 Samuel and 1 Kings are really silent on, we might think that Solomon came to worship at Gibeon because this is merely another place that Israel set up a high place, and that Solomon came here to worship, but it wasn't really where God wanted them to worship. and such a conclusion would be wrong even from 1 Kings. It is true that Israel had many high places set up before there was a temple because there was no temple at that time. And it is true that Solomon offered sacrifices at these high places, seemingly continuing to do so after the temple was built. But the writer of 1 Kings is merely using 1 Kings 3 verse 3 as an introductory remark to Solomon that will help explain Solomon's future actions. He is not condemning the king as sinning when Solomon went up to the great high place in Gibeon to worship God. And the reason we know this is because the chronicler reveals to us why this was referred to as the great high place, which is that the tabernacle of Moses, minus the Ark of the Covenant, was there. In other words, this great high place had the altar of burnt offering that Moses had made for the animal sacrifices to be offered on. Recall from 1 Chronicles 22 that David offered his sacrifices in Jerusalem at the altar he built on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. This seemingly was done with God's approval, but 1 Chronicles specifically said that David didn't offer sacrifices at Gibeon after God's punishment of Israel for the census. When Solomon became king, that would change. The king would once again offer sacrifices on the altar situated at the tabernacle of Moses. This determination by Solomon really does show us the condition of Solomon's heart at the beginning of his reign, which is one of service to God. And so recognizing that Solomon wasn't merely sacrificing to the Lord at any high place, but at the place where God's tabernacle was, places into context why it is here at Gibeon, at this particular time, that God chose to appear to Solomon in a dream, and why he asked what he asked. And of course, in this dream, God famously asked Solomon to ask him whatever he desired, and God would grant it. Solomon really could have asked for seemingly anything, but at this point in Solomon's life, Solomon was a humble man. He knew that he was a young man and had been tasked of leading God's people, a people that by now probably was around 5 million or more, based on the censuses David took during his lifetime. Now, how young Solomon is at this point, we don't know, for the Bible never says how old Solomon was when he began to reign or when he died. We only know how long he reigned, which was 40 years. Back in our study of David, we said that David was around 45 when he committed adultery with Bathsheba, meaning that Solomon could have been no more than 25 years old when he began to reign. That means it is likely that Solomon here is between 20 and 25 years old, which would be a young king. And as a young king, Solomon recognized his weakness, a lack of experience and wisdom with which to judge this people. For recall, judging was one of the roles of a king. Therefore, Solomon asked God for an understanding heart to judge God's people. In other words, Solomon wanted the wisdom to discern both good and evil, the ability not only to know the law, but properly apply it in all situations. It was not good enough for Solomon simply to have knowledge of what the law said. He had to be able to take what the law said and translate that into judgments, even in parts the law might not have directly dealt with, having only dealt with it in principle. That ask by Solomon was in and of itself wise, and showed Solomon's humility and desire to follow God. And the Lord was pleased at this, for Solomon didn't ask for something that would benefit himself or make a name for himself. He asked for something that would help others and lead them to God. Solomon chose wisely and showed a propensity of putting neighbor above self at this point in his life. And so God told Solomon that he would make Solomon wiser and give him a heart of more understanding than anyone who came before or who would come after. He would thus be able to administer justice like nobody else in Israel had or would do again. And above this, God would give Solomon that which he did not ask for, riches and honor. Now back in 1 Kings, the writer soon after showed us the effect of this wisdom, but the chronicler skips that event, showing us how Solomon used this wisdom in the building of the temple, and how God fulfilled his other promises to Solomon beyond measure by expanding Solomon's army and wealth, as is seen in verses 13 to 17 of chapter 1. That section of chapter 1 thus serves as an overview of Solomon's reign, not that these events happened and then the temple was built. All of this happened gradually over the course of Solomon's reign, and in conjunction, of course, with the building of the temple, a construction of which we'll begin to see, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verses 1 to 10, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.